So, little brief thing about Hanukkah. Because typically we do an in-depth historical look at it. This year we're not really doing that because Bruce ended up texting me last week and was like, hey, would you mind if we went over the Beatitudes? I'm like, well, Scripture's more important than a tradition, so yeah, let's do that. So short blurb on Hanukkah. Oh, good. Or were you?
The whole thing is rededication.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's it. It flows quite nicely. So the story of Hanukkah starts in 168 BCE, so about 200 years before Christ. It's something, honestly, that I think is extremely overlooked. If you ask a traditional Christian, like, hey, what does Hanukkah have to do with your faith? And most people will be like, oh, nothing. It's a Jewish holiday. They don't realize that Antiochus IV, he liked to call himself Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus God Manifest, essentially. In fact, he was a little off his rocker. The guy was nuts. I'll get into some of the reasons I'm making such startling claims in such a very informal way. There were some historians who took to calling him, instead of Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus Epimanes, which we've talked before. If you really want to discredit someone historically, you discredit their name, because that's how they're going to be remembered. If you want to curse someone, you strike all records of their name from history, because they're not going to be remembered. They're not going to have a legacy. So this guy who was presenting himself as Antiochus God Manifest becomes known historically by some as Antiochus Epimanes, which means Antiochus the Madman. He wanted to, Israel actually stood up to him. That's really one of the big conflicts. There were a ton of conflicts. I don't have the map here. There was the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire constantly fighting back and forth. And right in the middle was Israel. Antiochus didn't like the fact that Israel actually stood up to them, so he was going to show them who was boss. It is estimated that within the first 3 days of the battle the battles between Antiochus and the Israelites, 80,000 people were killed. There was an educational article, and I can't remember which university put it out, but it was called The True Myth of Hanukkah. And its subtitle was like a historical look at a battle between gods and men. So this is really something that's amazing. And if Antiochus would have had his way, Israel would have been wiped out. If Israel's wiped out, no Judah. No Judah, no Christ. All right, so it's actually amazing to me that more Christians, don't know much about Hanukkah. Yeah. It's not commanded of God, but it is something that's very important to point out. The Hanukkah we celebrate today, we do so in remembrance of what was done back then, but we're not doing it in the way they did it back then. The Hanukkah today is nothing like the Hanukkah back then. Hanukkah back then, it was the rededication of the temple, and they were unable to keep the Feast of Sukkot. And so they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. That's the real reason it's 8 days long. Wow. There is the legend of the oil. That's a legend. But the legend goes that there was only enough oil to burn the menorah for 1 day. But of course, you have to have the time to make the oil and refine it, and it was going to be 8 days before they actually had enough. And so, the Shemos lights at the same time, okay.
Yes.
But, and so of course the story goes that it burned constantly the entire time, all 8 days. But of course this is only the 7th day, so I'm going to stop right there. But that's, it became known as the Festival of Lights, and a lot of the ways we celebrate now, and remembering, it's tradition. Tradition is good. I know it sounds odd coming from me. I'm not against tradition. I'm against tradition that goes against Scripture. I think we need discernment. That's something that's sorely missing, sadly. But yeah, this is primarily a time of rededication. Antiochus, I mentioned that I would talk about some of the things he did because to really highlight how bad of a dude this was. He came in, of course, takes over the temple, kills, in short form, he kills the high priest, establishes a statue of Zeus, starts sacrificing pigs on the altar. He decided to do a lot of his fighting on the Sabbath because many of the Jews wouldn't fight back. And he decided that, I'm really against anything that looks remotely Jewish now after this war's been going on. And so, for example, if you circumcised your child, he would take the child, kill the child, hang it around the mother's neck, parade the mother through town, and throw her off the city walls. This is why some historians, opted to call him Antiochus the Madman. And in spite of this, God helped this tiny little country stand up to, at that point, the most powerful empire in the region.
Greece.
Yeah. And
some people may not know that.
Oh yeah. But yeah, this massively powerful, the powerhouse of the world at the time, and this tiny little country with guerrilla warfare tactics, led by Judah Maccabee, ends up defeating this massive empire. And like I said, the main draw isn't really even the battle. That's a great part, but the big thing that we're celebrating is the rededication of the temple. I also want to just put something in your mind, because it was something I happened to think about just this year as I was going through stuff. We've talked about how it was a secondary celebration of tabernacles, right? And you think about how excited they were to keep God's feast, because they come out of being refugees, living in caves, in fear of their lives, and they're like, we didn't get to celebrate God's holy time where he says we get to live outside. They finally get their houses back, and they celebrate the rededication of the temple by celebrating Sukkot and living outside of their house because they didn't get to keep Sukkot proper and actually build the sukkahs. And and that was something that really hit me as I was thinking about it this year. But there's been one other time where I've kind of ended talks in a song. And I kind of want to do that because I found a song and I couldn't find an audio copy because I was going to bring it just for our music today. Couldn't find an audio copy of it and I forgot to print it out. But I do want you to listen to the lyrics. It's by Marty Goetz. It's called Hanukkah. And like I said, I mentioned this last week, that we don't have a physical temple right now, but we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so there should be a time for us of rededication for ourselves. And honestly, I think the song captured that well. So, make my life your temple, Lord, at this season's start, to pull down every idol I have raised up in my heart. On this Hanukkah, on this feast of dedication, I dedicate myself to you. Take my defiled altar, come cleanse and come repair. So every time I falter, I can run to meet you there. On this Hanukkah, on this feast of dedication, I dedicate myself to you. And with every candle on the menorah that illuminates the night, comes a prayer you'd kindle in me, Yeshua, a desire for your fire, for your light. Make of my mortal body a house worthy of your name. Rid me of what's ungodly and every hidden thing of shame. On this Hanukkah, on this feast of dedication, I dedicate myself to you. Take my supply of oil, not enough to burn long, I fear. But oh, how I pray I may one day say, a great miracle happened here. On this Hanukkah, on this feast of dedication, I dedicate myself to you.
Nice, beautiful, hallelujah.
Said it perfectly. Yeah,
Thank you.
sums it up.
No, hand off.
Thank you. Discussion came up recently in which the Beatitudes were brought up as a subject, so I thought I would do a little talk on the Beatitudes. And if you're wondering what a Beatitude is, it's a good saying. Okay. And if we're going to talk about the Beatitudes, I think we ought to start by reading them. So I'll be reading from Matthew 5:3 on. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, and persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I would suggest to you that these are not just a bunch of nice sayings, but that there's actually a plan and purpose behind them. And what I have on the board, I'm going to pass out. Now, I only made 12 copies, so and there's 2 more pages of notes, but I'm not handing them out now because I don't want you to be distracted from, reading while I'm talking. And I think that we're going to go ahead and cover the Sermon on the Mount as a second hour thing starting maybe next week. There's more to the Sermon on the Mount than you may think. I believe the Sermon on the Mount is actually a commentary on the Lord's Prayer. And if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, it forms kind of a chiastic structure, and at the peak of that, right in the middle, is the Lord's Prayer. And kind of like Leviticus, in the book of Leviticus, there's a chiastic structure to the book, and what's at the very pinnacle? Yom Kippur. Okay, and what's at the pinnacle that's most important? I think the Lord's Prayer is a lot more in-depth than most of us ever give any idea to it. Anyway, I will go over my little outline I have up on the board. We don't have time to cover all the scriptures, but I've written them down on the little stair step there. Yeshua said, count the cost before you decide to do something. And I think that before you get on this staircase, you should count the cost. Because if you look at where it ends up with you being persecuted because of the kingdom of heaven. Okay. if you are not aware that following Messiah is going to lead to persecution of some kind, even if it's just, we live in a generally pro-biblical society. It's changing radically and very quickly to being an anti-biblical society. But in our lifetimes, there hasn't been anything that we can call real persecution. Not in the sense of being tortured and killed. There are a lot of people who will not accept you or promote you if you are a believer or if you hold to moral standards. But there's never been pogroms and things like that. But I'm not saying there won't be. But be aware. Anyway, I didn't bring a pointer, so I guess I'll use my little club here. By the way, the gavel doesn't work. We tried the bell, we tried the gavel. The only thing that works to get people to sit down and be quiet is our song. So I'm happy for that. I wasted the money on the gavel. Anyway.
Pound meat with it.
To be poor in spirit, I believe, means to accept that you are spiritually bankrupt and you have nothing to offer God. In that proverb that I wrote in there, it talks about, an angry man versus a man who is poor in spirit. Why do we get angry? A lot of times we get angry because of our pride. I shouldn't be treated this way. You have no right to do this, and so I'm going to go off on you.
I'm not in control.
Okay, that's part of it too.
Oh, God.
But even when you're not in control, if you're poor in spirit or whatever, you forget this. Just scratch that. Melanie, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, when your perceived rights have been violated.
Right, that's exactly it. When your perceived rights have been violated, then you get angry.
Well, that's it.
But that's going to come up more under another heading. But to be poor in spirit, you're recognizing that you have no standing before God. You can't demand anything from God, and you are in a state of sinfulness. Now, you will find in some of our other steps that you'll find the phrase poor spirit again, other than just the Proverbs reference. But that was the first one I came across. If you recognize that you're spiritually bankrupt in front of God, and that you've spent your life in sin and wasting your life, then what does that naturally lead to? It leads to mourning over the things that you've done wrong and the fact that you've wasted so much of your life. Because we only get so many days. And if we've wasted most of them on vanity, then that's really something to be upset about. I think Dustin kind of related back to this last week a little bit. But back in college, I realized that it's only what's important to you on your deathbed that was important. If you're dying and it's important to you, then it was really important. Does having a new car, when you're on your deathbed, will having had a new car be important to you?
No.
A big bank account? No. But the people whose lives you've touched and who touched you, those things will be important. What have you accomplished for eternity will be important. The people that you've led to faith or encouraged along the way, that will be important. Most of the stuff that we think is important won't be important then. That's where I think the rubber meets the road. Okay. Once you mourn over your life and you realize how much you've wasted, you come to a point of seeking something else. You realize there has to be something more. And the essence of meekness, or humility as some people translate it, is that you recognize your true position before man and God. You recognize that God is God and people are just people. Okay, so instead of trying to be impressed with impressing people, you want to impress God. Yes?
Today we have a misunderstanding of that word meek.
Yes.
We put it hand in hand quite often with the word weak, and it's not. Meekness is not weakness.
Yeah. Meekness is not weakness. That's correct. It says Moses was the meekest man on all the earth. Moses was anything but weak. He was groomed to be a pharaoh. He was an engineer. He was a military genius. And he led 6 million people to the desert in spite of the fact they were constantly griping and wanting to stone him. He was, if meek meant weak, Moses would have been dead and there would have never been an Exodus. Okay? No. Meek is strong because you recognize that the only person you answer to is God, not people. Okay? And when you're meek, you accept God's standards as superior to your own. In fact, the Isaiah 55 reference that you'll read under the next step points out that my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, my ways are higher than your ways. The meek man recognizes that and then begins to hunger and thirst for God's ways. Okay? Once you realize there's a better way, you want the better way, and you begin to seek it, and you hunger and thirst after what's real. Okay? And again, in Isaiah it says, why spend money on food that isn't food? Come to me and I will give you true food, true spiritual food. Okay? And once you see that there's something real out there to be drawn toward, then you seek it and you hunger and thirst after it, and you spend the rest of your life seeking to be more in line with that which is eternal rather than that which is temporary. And that's a real difference. Are you seeking what's eternal, or are you seeking what's temporary? Most people are out there seeking what won't last. Okay? And again, on your deathbed or when you die, what will you have after death? Only what you've put ahead. In the Sermon on the Mount, Yeshua says, don't worry about storing up silver and gold and things that corrode and rust and can be stolen. Put your money into the kingdom of heaven. Okay, you're investing ahead that way. When you die, you can collect on your investment. And it's one that won't be hurt by the economy because the Bank of Heaven doesn't go up and down like the stock market. Those who hunger and thirst after righteousness will inevitably, frequently, and inevitably fail. How many of you have tried to do something righteous and failed at it? How many of you have tried to quit a bad habit or a whatever and failed? Okay, I could stand up here all day long and never repeat myself twice if I repeated to you all the failures in my life. I have failed at so many things, it's ridiculous. If you fail, what do you realize that you need?
Help.
You need mercy.
Yeah, mercy.
Okay, and if you need mercy because you fail constantly, then what should you extend to those around you?
Mercy.
What's the next step? Blessed are the merciful. Because when you've tried to be righteous and you failed, and then you see other people failing, you can be merciful to them because you understand where they're at. They're just like you. Okay? Let me correct that. And in one of the passages in Isaiah, he goes to the thing about the people are mourning over their sins and being poor in spirit. He says, but of the wicked, they will be broken in spirit, and there will be no rest for the wicked. Okay, so there are people who are trying to conform to God's ways, and you're merciful to them when they fail. But on the other hand, there are those who are wicked and have no desire for what is righteous. Okay? You still have to extend them mercy, but you have to understand who they are also. Okay? Because that's where we're going to come up here. We'll get to that here. After you realize the need for mercy and being merciful, you have to then adopt God's standards. You need to become pure in heart. And what does that mean? That means to see things the way God sees them. There's a song, and I wrote it somewhere in the paper. When I was in Bible college, they always tried to have some kind of musical thing. And two of my professors wrote this song. And I should probably look at it just in case I foul up the words. And me singing is always a bad thing, and today it's worse than usual. It's actually kind of a prayer. But let me see this world, dear Lord, through your eyes when men mock your holy name, when they beat you and spat upon you, Lord. Let me love them as you love them, just the same. For if once I could see this world the way you see, I just know I'd serve you more faithfully. If you see the world the way God does, then you're going to be pure in heart, because you're going to be seeking that which is true and that which is pure. Okay? And it means that all the garbage that people can do to you or say about you will become meaningless. It is only what God thinks that will count. And when you become pure in heart, you see it that way. And when you see the world the way God does, you see that the world needs to be reconciled to Him. And so you become a peacemaker, reconciling the world to yourself. In 2 Corinthians 5, which is on your paper, it says that we are ambassadors for Christ, reconciling the world to Himself. Okay. Part of that is you being able to reconcile yourself to those around you. Okay. I'll tell you a story. There was a woman whose husband had done something early on in their marriage, and she held that against him, okay, and refused to sleep with him for 16 years. On his deathbed, a woman came and gave him the gospel. He'd heard the gospel many times, had been to church many times, knew the gospel inside and out, but did not believe and mocked the church. On his deathbed, she finally came and she confessed to him that she was wrong, to have held this grudge against him, and she forgave him. He then accepted the gospel and died as a believer. It was her inability to reconcile with him that kept him from Christ. Okay? But when they finally reconciled, he turned to the Lord. Okay? He was going to die an unbeliever, but God moved her to finally forgive him. If we cannot forgive those around us, then how can we expect them to accept God's forgiveness? Is forgiveness ever easy?
No.
No. If it was easy, everybody would do it, and everybody would be happy and get along. Okay, but no, forgiveness is not easy. Forgiveness really costs you your pride and your sense of justice. Okay, when someone has wronged you legally, or whether it's outside of the realm of law, someone has clearly wronged you, it's hard to forgive them. Do they deserve to be forgiven? No. That's an act of grace. Okay? And it's hard to do that because you want your pound of flesh. Okay? You may not have it, you have no way of getting to them, but you want it. And so you have to purify your spirit and be willing to forgive someone that doesn't deserve it. Okay? May never change, but you're willing to forgive them. And that opens the door to reconciliation. Okay? How many of us deserve for God to forgive us? Think about it. God is absolute perfection. We don't even come close to that. We have violated and trampled His law in so many ways. In the prayer of confession it says, thought, word, and deed. Some of us have led lives of good deeds. We haven't done anything, but our thoughts and our hearts have been very far from God. There would be many fewer people in the world today if I ever let my heart loose to do what it feels like. We wouldn't have a world overpopulation problem. Especially coming from my background, which some of you know a little bit about. When you become a peacemaker, and you start trying to reconcile the world to God, the world and the God of this world will hate you. Yeshua said, if they hated me, they'll hate you. There's a lot of money in war. Did you know that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of money in war. Are peacemakers welcome to people who want war? No. And peacemakers aren't welcome between two people who are determined to hate each other. It was funny. Y'all have heard of the Hatfields and McCoys.
Yep.
Do you know when the feud finally ended?
When one of them married the other one?
No.
Well, that's how it
One
started, didn't it?
asked for forgiveness.
When
one of them went
when
there.
Hatfield got baptized.
Oh, baptized.
Yeah, he became a believer and got baptized, and that's when the feud ended. He reconciled with God and then reconciled with his neighbor.
Mm.
Okay? Reconciliation is hard on multiple levels. Okay? And the God of this world loves war. He loves conflict. He loves to see people die and suffer. Okay? The rightful God of this world hates that. And so you have a war going on between those who are looking to love and be light and those who are darkness and hatred. Okay? And if you step into this war, whichever side you're on, the other side won't like you. If you step onto the side of God and you follow, you'll notice like a little runner here. Well, he's on a path. He's going up this path. And this is the path of sanctification, becoming holy, becoming like Christ. Okay, the goal in Romans 8:28 and 29 is to be like Christ. That's what we're to be conformed to his image. And display the fruits of the Spirit, Galatians chapter 5. Again, I've got that written on your paper. Okay, I don't want to take time to look up all the other references, but I would strongly suggest that if you don't do anything else with this, that you go back and you read Psalm 37. Because everything in here is in Psalm 37. Okay, I've only made a couple of notations, but Psalm 37, I think, is what Yeshua is summarizing in the Beatitudes. Maybe he did his morning meditations on Psalm 37 and decided to put it in a form we could follow a little bit more easily. But that's what I think the whole Beatitudes is about. It's a staircase to being holy, to being like Christ. Jim, you waved your hand.
Yeah, where is the other location? I think it's in 1 Peter or 2 Peter.
Location of what?
Where this same,
Oh,
Staircase.
the other time you would find that would be in Luke.
in Luke,
Yeah, it's not as nearly as explicit though. And with each of these, with each thing comes a blessing. You know, the blessing also relates back to what the meaning of the requirement is or the step is. Anyway, something to take home, meditate. I have 2 more pages with references that can be passed out for those of you who want to look things up. I'll pass them around. Kathy, I don't know. Okay, this is page 2 here. If the pages look different, don't take the same ones. Any questions, comments, or disputations?
And there was so much discussion about war and being against war, and, you know, people were anti-war. And I had someone tell me, when you take that position, you are denying the millions of military who have enlisted and so on and so forth. And so there's a dichotomy there that we need to understand.
Well, historically, the church has defined what is called just war.
Yeah.
Just warfare. There are reasons to go to war, but there are people who just want war
Oh, yeah.
for the sake of making money.
Economic reasons.
For economic reasons, right. Okay. But, yeah.
I'm a girl's kid, and I was my dad's revenge on the military. Didn't get him out of the military for 38 years. But they're all warmongers. That's what the military calls them. That's all they think about, night and day, is let's get into the next conflict. So I was the peacekeeper, and my dad was the warmonger. Because he believed in war, but he did it in a way it's kind of biblical.
Well, that's why I was
That's
just
what I'm
talking
saying.
about. There's just war.
There's just war,
Okay,
even though he was in our
but
military.
there's a lot of war that's conducted because of pride,
Yeah.
okay?
We had that problem.
If you ever watch the movie Patton, I think they reveal something about him. When he gets down, he's holding this bloody body and he says, what's he say? God help me, I do love it so.
God help me, what?
I do love it so. War. Because to some people, winning, killing is winning. Just like with a lot of sexual perverts, committing a sexual act is a victory for them. It has nothing to do with love. Okay, it's just they maintained a victory. They got someone to do something. Okay, and the human condition is such that our hearts are corrupt, and this is what God is trying to lead us away from.
Right.
A godly heart is not based on serving self; it's based on serving God.